The muffled sound of approaching hoofbeats was the first thing Olivia Zimmerman had heard in days that wasn't her own labored breathing or the scurrying of mice across the dirt floor. Imprisoned in total darkness, she had lost track of time in this forsaken shack on the edge of the Montana Territory. The year was 1876, and Olivia had learned the hard way that the promise of a new life in the West could turn to dust faster than summer rain on parched earth. The hoofbeats grew louder, then stopped. Olivia pressed her ear against the rough-hewn wall, her heart racing. Footsteps crunched on the dry ground outside, followed by the rattle of chains being disturbed. "Hello, is anyone in there?" A man's voice called. Olivia tried to answer, but her throat was raw from thirst and previous screaming. She managed only a hoarse whisper before forcing herself to pound weakly on the wall. "Stand back," the voice commanded. The sound of something heavy striking the padlocked door echoed through the tiny shack. Once, twice, 3 times the blow came before wood splintered and light, blinding, painful, glorious light flooded in. Olivia shielded her eyes with a dirt-streaked arm, tears streaming down her face. A tall silhouette filled the doorway. As her vision adjusted, she made out a man in a worn leather vest, dusty from the trail. His face was partially shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat, but she could see kind eyes studying her with concern. "You're free," he said simply, extending a calloused hand toward her. Olivia stared at the outstretched hand, almost afraid to believe this moment was real. After a moment's hesitation, she reached for it. The man's grip was firm yet gentle as he helped her to her feet. Olivia's legs, weak from confinement and poor nourishment, buckled beneath her. He caught her before she fell, one strong arm around her waist. "Easy now," he said. "My name's Franklin Tanner. Most folks call me Frank." "Olivia," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Olivia Zimmerman." Frank guided her outside, where a chestnut mare was tethered to a scrubby tree. The late afternoon sun bathed the landscape in golden light, and Olivia squinted against its brightness. The vast expanse of prairie stretched around them, punctuated by distant hills. After the confines of the shack, the openness was almost overwhelming. "How long were you in there?" Frank asked, reaching for a canteen. Olivia accepted the water gratefully, taking small sips as he'd instructed. "I'm not certain, 5 days, perhaps 6. They took my timepiece." She paused, gathering strength. "There were 3 of them. They robbed the stagecoach I was traveling on." The other passengers were allowed to continue, but they... She faltered. "You don't need to explain right now," Frank said. "We should get you somewhere safe. Nearest town is Willow Creek, about 10 miles east." "No," Olivia said suddenly, surprising herself with her vehemence. "They said they'd be back. They have. Associates in Willow Creek." Frank studied her face, seeming to weigh her words. "All right then. My cabin's about 15 miles northwest of here. It's nothing fancy, but you'll be safe there until you recover." Olivia nodded, relief washing over her. The thought of facing strangers in her current state was unbearable. "Thank you, Mr. Tanner." "Just Frank," he corrected with a slight smile. "Can you ride?" "I can," she assured him, though her shaking legs suggested otherwise. Frank appeared to notice her trembling but said nothing as he helped her onto his horse. He mounted behind her, one arm secured around her waist to steady her. Olivia stiffened initially at the unfamiliar contact, but exhaustion soon overcame her discomfort. As they rode away from her prison, she found herself leaning back against his chest, drawing strength from his solid presence. The rhythmic movement of the horse and the warmth of the sun on her face lulled Olivia into a daze. Images from the past week flashed through her mind: the excitement of leaving Philadelphia, the terrifying robbery, the darkness of the shack. She had come west to take a position as a schoolteacher in Helena, carrying with her dreams of independence and adventure. Never had she imagined those dreams would lead her here. "You still with me?" Frank's voice cut through her thoughts. "Yes," she murmured, "just thinking about how different this all is from what I had planned." "The West has a way of changing plans," he replied. "Sometimes for worse, sometimes for better." As they rode, Frank pointed out landmarks: a distinctive rock formation, a stand of aspen trees, a creek that wound through the valley. Olivia tried to focus on these details, anchoring herself to this new reality of freedom. The land was beautiful in its vastness, so different from the crowded streets of Philadelphia. The sun was setting by the time they arrived at Frank's cabin. It was a simple structure, solidly built of logs with a stone chimney. A small corral stood nearby, currently empty except for a dappled gray gelding that nickered at their approach. Frank dismounted first, then reached up to help Olivia down. Her legs nearly gave way when her feet touched the ground, and she clutched at his shoulders to remain upright. "Sorry," she whispered, embarrassed by her weakness. "Nothing to apologize for," he assured her, keeping one hand at her elbow as he guided her toward the cabin. "You've been through an ordeal." The interior of the cabin was neat and sparse, a table with 2 chairs, a small cook stove, shelves with provisions, and a narrow bed in one corner. Rifles hung on pegs above the door, and a bookshelf holding a surprising number of volumes stood against one wall. Frank quickly set about building a fire in the stove. "I'll heat some water so you can wash up," he said, not looking at her directly. "And I'll find you something clean to wear. It'll be too big, but better than what you have on now." Olivia glanced down at her once fine traveling suit, now torn and filthy. "That's very kind of you." While Frank tended to his horse outside, Olivia sank into one of the wooden chairs, overwhelmed by the simple luxury of sitting on something other than a dirt floor. She ran her fingers along the smooth tabletop, feeling the grain of the wood, grounding herself in these small sensations of normalcy. When Frank returned, he carried a bundle of clothing and set a basin of steaming water before her. "I'll wait outside," he said. "Take your time. There's soap on the shelf there and food when you're ready." Once alone, Olivia peeled off her ruined garments. Using the warm water and soap, she scrubbed days of grime from her skin, fighting tears as she uncovered bruises and scratches she hadn't even realized she had. Her long auburn hair, usually her pride, was a tangled mess, but she did her best to clean and comb it with her fingers. The clothes Frank had provided, a faded blue shirt and canvas trousers held up with suspenders, engulfed her slender frame, but they were clean and soft from many washings. She rolled up the sleeves and pant legs, cinched the waist as best she could, and called for him to return. Frank entered carrying an armful of firewood, which he stacked neatly beside the stove. If he found her appearance in his clothing amusing, he didn't show it. Instead, he nodded approvingly. "Feel better, immeasurably," Olivia admitted, "though I fear I've used all your hot water." "There's plenty more where that came from," he said, already setting a pot of coffee to boil. He moved efficiently around the small space, slicing bread and cheese, warming beans and salt pork in a skillet. Olivia watched him, noting the ease with which he performed these domestic tasks. As they ate their simple meal, Olivia studied her rescuer in the lamplight. Frank Tanner was older than she'd initially thought, perhaps in his early 30s. Lines at the corners of his eyes suggested both laughter and hardship. His brown hair, streaked with hints of gold, curled slightly where it met his collar. His features were weathered but handsome, with a straight nose, square jaw, and eyes the color of a summer sky. "Why were you out there today?" she asked suddenly. "How did you find me?" Frank set down his coffee mug. "I've been tracking those men for 3 days. They're part of the Turner gang, been terrorizing this territory for months. Stagecoach robberies mostly, but they've been getting bolder." He paused. "I didn't know they'd taken a hostage this time. That's new." "You're a lawman, former U.S. Marshal," he corrected. "I retired from that life 2 years ago, but when things happen in my territory," he shrugged, "old habits." Olivia absorbed this information. "The others, the men who took me, got away," Frank admitted, frustration evident in his voice. "I was following their trail when I found the shack. Wasn't expecting anyone to be inside. Those places are usually abandoned, but I heard something." He looked at her. "I'm glad I checked." "As am I," Olivia said softly. After they finished eating, Frank insisted she take the bed while he made a pallet on the floor. Too exhausted to argue, Olivia sank onto the mattress, pulling the quilt up to her chin. Despite her fatigue, she found herself watching Frank as he banked the fire and prepared for sleep. There was something reassuring about his methodical movements, his quiet competence. "Mr. Tanner Frank," she corrected herself. "Thank you for everything." He glanced over at her, his expression softening. "Get some rest, Miss Zimmerman, you're safe now." As Olivia drifted toward sleep, she reflected on how strange it was to feel secure in a stranger's cabin, miles from anywhere, when just hours ago she had been certain she would die in that shack. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for now she was safe. She was free. The nightmare came without warning. Olivia was back in the shack, darkness pressing in from all sides, air thick with dust and fear. She could hear their voices outside, laughing, coming closer. The lock rattled. She tried to scream, but no sound came. "Olivia." A different voice cut through the terror. Firm hands gripped her shoulders. "Olivia, wake up. You're dreaming." Her eyes flew open to find Frank leaning over her, concern etched on his face. The cabin was dark except for the faint glow of banked coals in the stove. Olivia gasped for breath, disoriented. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I was back there, I know," he said, his voice gentle. "But you're not. You're here and you're safe." Olivia nodded, willing her racing heart to slow. Frank started to move away, but she reached out, catching his wrist. "Please," she said, hating the tremor in her voice. "Could you just stay close, just until I fall asleep again?" Frank hesitated, then nodded. He settled onto the edge of the bed, his back against the wall. Olivia lay back down, comforted by his presence. Neither spoke, but the silence between them was oddly companionable. Eventually, her breathing steadied, and she slipped back into sleep, this time without dreams. When Olivia woke the next morning, sunlight streamed through the cabin's single window. Frank was already up, tending the fire and brewing coffee. The aroma filled the small space, rich and inviting. "Morning," he said, noticing her stirring. "How are you feeling?" Olivia sat up slowly, taking stock. Her body ached, but the fog of fear that had clouded her mind seemed to have lifted somewhat. "Better," she decided. "Thank you for last night." Frank nodded, seemingly uncomfortable with her gratitude. "Coffee's ready if you want some, and there's water heating if you'd like to wash up again." Over breakfast, they discussed what should happen next. Olivia explained her original plans, the teaching position in Helena, the trunk containing her belongings that had continued on the stagecoach. "Helena's a good 2 days' ride from here," Frank said. "But we could reach Willow Creek by nightfall if you're feeling up to it. You could catch the next stage from there." Olivia's hand tightened around her coffee mug. "Those men said they'd be watching for me in Willow Creek. What if they're still there?" Frank's expression hardened. "Then they'll have me to deal with." "I can't ask you to put yourself in danger for me," Olivia protested. "You've already done so much." "You're not asking," Frank replied simply. "But we don't have to decide right this minute. You need time to recover." Olivia looked around the cabin, noting details she'd missed the night before: a handmade quilt on the bed, drawings pinned to one wall, a small collection of carved wooden animals on a shelf. Signs of a life carefully built. "What brought you out here?" she asked. "You said you were a marshal before." Frank was quiet for a moment. "I needed space," he finally said. "After the war, I thought wearing a badge would help make things right. Did that job for almost 10 years. He shook his head, saw too much, decided I'd rather be on my own, make my own peace. "And have you found peace?" His eyes met hers. "Some days." After breakfast, Frank suggested a short walk to help Olivia regain her strength. The air outside was crisp, the sky an endless blue vault overhead. Frank's cabin stood in a small clearing, backed by pine forest with a view of rolling hills to the east. A stream gurgled nearby, and wildflowers dotted the grassy expanse surrounding the homestead. "It's beautiful here," Olivia observed as they walked slowly toward the corral. "That's why I chose it," Frank replied. "Far enough from everything to be peaceful, close enough to civilization when I need supplies." The dappled gray horse approached the fence as they drew near, nickering softly. Frank reached into his pocket for a piece of apple, which the horse delicately took from his palm. "This is Thunder," he said, stroking the animal's nose. "Best horse I've ever had. And the one we rode yesterday, Sadie, she's newer to me, found her abandoned last winter, half-starved. She's coming along nicely, though." Olivia reached out tentatively to touch Thunder's velvety muzzle. The horse snuffled at her hand, then bumped her shoulder gently with his head. "He likes you," Frank observed, seeming pleased. "I've always loved horses," Olivia admitted. "My father kept several when I was growing up. I used to ride every day." Her expression clouded. "That feels like another lifetime now." They continued their circuit around the cabin, Frank pointing out his small vegetable garden, the smokehouse where he preserved game, the workshop attached to the barn where he did carpentry during the winter months. Olivia listened attentively, impressed by the self-sufficient life he had created. By midday, however, her strength was flagging. Frank noticed her faltering steps and guided her back to the cabin, where he insisted she rest while he prepared a meal. Olivia didn't argue, sinking gratefully onto the bed. She hadn't realized how deeply the ordeal had affected her. Even this short excursion had left her exhausted. As she watched Frank move about the cabin, she found herself wondering about his life before. Had there been a woman in it? The cabin showed signs of a solitary existence, yet he seemed comfortable with domestic tasks. There were no photographs or mementos that suggested a family, but the little carved animals and drawings hinted at a gentler side than his rugged exterior suggested. Over the next 3 days, Olivia gradually regained her strength. Frank proved to be a patient host, giving her space when she needed it and company when the silence grew too heavy. He shared his books with her, a surprisingly varied collection that included history, poetry, and several novels. In the evenings, they sat by the fire, sometimes reading, sometimes talking. Olivia told him about her life in Philadelphia. Her decision to come west after her father's death left her with few prospects at home. Frank spoke little of his past, but did share stories of his years as a marshal, the people he'd met, the places he'd seen. He had a gift for description that made his tales come alive. On the 4th morning, Olivia woke early to find Frank already outside, chopping wood. Through the window, she watched the rhythmic swing of the axe, the flecks of muscle beneath his shirt. There was something mesmerizing about his movements, efficient, powerful, assured. When he paused to wipe his brow, glancing toward the cabin, Olivia quickly stepped away from the window, feeling oddly like she'd been caught at something improper. Later, as they shared breakfast, Olivia broached the subject they'd both been avoiding. "I should make plans to continue to Helena," she said. "I've imposed on your hospitality long enough." Frank looked up from his plate. "You're not imposing," he said, "but if you're feeling ready to travel, we can head out tomorrow." Olivia questioned. "I'll take you to Helena," he stated, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Those men are still out there. I won't have you traveling alone." "But that's at least 2 days of travel," Olivia protested. "You can't just leave your homestead." "My neighbor checks in on the place when I'm gone. And those Turner boys need to be dealt with anyway. 2 birds, 1 stone." His eyes met hers across the table. "Unless you'd rather I didn't accompany you." "No," Olivia admitted. "I would feel safer with you. I just don't want to be a burden." "You're not," Frank said simply and resumed eating. That afternoon, they prepared for the journey. Frank mended Olivia's traveling dress as best he could while she packed provisions for the trail. The easy routine they had established over the past days shifted, a new awareness between them as they moved around each other in the small cabin. "Have you thought about what you'll do if the teaching position has been filled?" Frank asked as he oiled his saddle. "It's been almost 2 weeks since the stagecoach was supposed to arrive." Olivia hadn't considered this possibility. "I suppose I'll have to find other work," she said slowly. "I have some savings, but not enough to return east." Frank nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Helena's growing fast, plenty of opportunities for an educated woman like yourself." "You've been there recently, last spring," he confirmed. "It's changed a lot since the gold rush days." "More respectable now." As evening approached, a sudden thunderstorm rolled in from the mountains. Rain lashed against the cabin, and lightning illuminated the darkening interior in brilliant flashes. Frank lit the lamps and stoked the fire higher, while Olivia stood at the window watching the storm's fury. "Might have to delay our departure if this keeps up," Frank observed, coming to stand beside her. "Streams will be running high tomorrow." Olivia nodded, strangely relieved at the prospect of one more day in this place that had become a sanctuary. Lightning flashed again, briefly illuminating their reflections in the glass standing close, almost touching but not quite. In that frozen moment, Olivia was struck by how right they looked together, and the thought startled her. "I should check on the horses," Frank said, reaching for his coat. "In this weather?" Olivia asked, concerned. "They get nervous during storms," he explained. "Won't be long." While he was gone, Olivia busied herself preparing their evening meal. The domesticity of the act felt natural now, as if she had been doing this for years instead of days. She set water to boil for coffee, sliced bread, and stirred a pot of stew Frank had started earlier. When he returned, soaked to the skin despite his coat, Olivia handed him a towel without comment. He thanked her with a nod, removing his wet outer garments before sitting at the table. They ate in companionable silence, the storm providing a dramatic backdrop to their simple meal. After dinner, Frank took out a deck of cards. "Know how to play poker?" he asked. Olivia smiled. "My father taught me, though he always said it wasn't ladylike to admit it." Frank shuffled the cards, his hands deft. "Your secret's safe with me." They played for an hour, using beans as chips. Olivia proved to be a skilled player, much to Frank's evident surprise and amusement. When she won the third hand in a row, he leaned back in his chair, studying her with new respect. "I believe I've been hustled, Miss Zimmerman." Olivia gathered her winnings, trying to suppress a smile. "I believe you have, Mr. Tanner." Their eyes met across the table, and something shifted in the air between them. Frank's gaze dropped to her mouth, then back to her eyes. For a moment, Olivia thought he might lean forward, close the distance between them. Instead, he cleared his throat and began collecting the cards. "It's getting late," he said, his voice slightly rough. "We should turn in." Olivia nodded, inexplicably disappointed. She moved to the bed while Frank prepared his pallet on the floor. The storm continued outside, rain drumming on the roof, wind whistling through the eaves. Olivia lay awake, listening to the tempest and to Frank's breathing gradually slowing as he drifted to sleep. She thought about the journey ahead, about Helena and the life she had planned. It all seemed less certain now, less urgent. In just a few days, this cabin and this man had come to represent safety and comfort in a way she hadn't experienced since childhood. The thought of leaving brought an unexpected ache to her chest. Morning brought clear skies but, as Frank had predicted, swollen streams that made travel inadvisable. They agreed to wait another day, and Olivia secretly welcomed the delay. After breakfast, Frank suggested they check his trapline, which ran along the creek at the edge of his property. "I'm not much of a trapper," he explained as they walked. "Just enough to supplement the hunting, mostly muskrat and beaver." Olivia picked her way carefully along the muddy path, grateful for the borrowed boots Frank had provided. The storm had washed the world clean, and everything sparkled in the morning light. Wildflowers bobbed their heads in the breeze, and birds called from the trees overhead. "It's so alive out here," Olivia observed. "In the city, you forget sometimes that the world is more than buildings and streets." Frank glanced at her. "Do you miss it?" "The city," Olivia considered the question. "I miss certain things. Museums, concerts, bookshops," she smiled. "Hot baths whenever I want them." "No museums out here," Frank acknowledged, "but we do have hot baths, just takes more effort." They reached the creek, which had indeed risen considerably overnight. Frank checked his traps efficiently, finding 2 with muskrats and 1 with a medium-sized beaver. He dispatched the beaver quickly and humanely, then reset the trap. "Is that what you're wearing?" he asked, nodding toward her borrowed clothes. Olivia looked down at herself. "I suppose I've grown accustomed to them." "They suit you," Frank said simply, then turned to lead the way back to the cabin. The day passed quickly. Frank showed Olivia how to prepare the pelts while he butchered the meat. They worked together to preserve what they wouldn't eat immediately, salting some and smoking the rest. Olivia found herself enjoying the labor, taking satisfaction in the practical skills she was learning. In the afternoon, true to his word, Frank heated water for a bath. He set up a tin tub behind a makeshift screen in the cabin, then excused himself to work in the barn while Olivia bathed. The hot water was blissful, and she lingered until it began to cool, washing her hair thoroughly and scrubbing every inch of skin. After her bath, Olivia put on her mended traveling dress, feeling strangely formal after days in Frank's comfortable clothes. When he returned to the cabin, he paused in the doorway, his eyes taking in her transformation. "You look." He began, then seemed at a loss for words. Olivia smoothed her skirts, suddenly self-conscious. "More like a proper lady, I hope." "You always looked like a lady," Frank said quietly. "Even in my old clothes." The simple compliment warmed her more than it should have. "Thank you, the water's still fairly hot if you'd like a bath as well," Frank nodded. "Think I will, been a few days." While he bathed, Olivia prepared dinner, trying not to think about him just a few feet away, separated only by a thin screen. When he emerged, his hair was damp and he had shaved, revealing a strong jawline previously hidden beneath several days' growth of beard. He wore clean clothes, not his usual working attire, but a white shirt and dark trousers that suggested they were reserved for trips to town. "Your turn to look different," Olivia remarked. Frank ran a hand over his smooth chin. "Figured I should remember what my face looks like occasionally." They ate dinner outside, sitting on the porch steps as the sun set behind the mountains. The evening was mild, with just enough breeze to keep insects at bay. In the distance, coyotes began their nightly chorus, their yips and howls echoing across the valley. "Will you stay in Helena?" Frank asked suddenly. If the teaching position is filled, Olivia watched a hawk circling overhead. "I'm not sure," she admitted. "I came west for a fresh start, but I hadn't planned beyond securing that position." "What about going back east?" "No," Olivia said firmly. "There's nothing for me there now. My father was my only family and our house was sold to pay his debts." She turned to look at him. "What about you? Will you stay here?" Frank gazed out over his property. "For now, I've put down some roots here." He paused. "First place that's felt like home in a long time." "It's a beautiful home," Olivia said softly. Their eyes met, and in the fading light, Olivia could see something in Frank's expression that made her heart beat faster. He leaned toward her slightly, then stopped himself, looking away. "We should head out early tomorrow," he said, his voice gruff. "If the weather holds, we can make good time." Olivia nodded, trying to hide her disappointment. "Yes, of course." They rose and went inside, preparing for sleep with the same routine they had established over the past days. But tonight, something was different. The air between them seemed charged with unspoken words and unrealized possibilities. As Olivia lay in bed, listening to Frank settle onto his pallet, she wondered if she had imagined that moment on the porch, the look in his eyes, the slight movement toward her. Perhaps she had read too much into his kindness, mistaking compassion for something more. "Frank," she said softly into the darkness. "Yes." His voice came back immediately, suggesting he was as awake as she was. Olivia hesitated, then asked the question that had been on her mind. "Why did you really come looking for those men, the ones who took me?" There was a long silence. Finally, Frank spoke, his voice low. "My wife and daughter were killed by men like that, 6 years ago during a stagecoach robbery near Cheyenne." Olivia's breath caught. "Oh, Frank, I'm so sorry." "I was a marshal then," he continued. "Away on assignment by the time I got back." His voice trailed off. "The men were never caught. So you became a marshal to find them?" "I was already a marshal. I stayed one to find men like them." The rustling of blankets suggested he had turned toward her in the darkness. "I couldn't save Sarah and Emma, but when I heard about the Turner gang operating in this area, I couldn't just sit by." Olivia absorbed this revelation, understanding now his determination, his solitary existence, the shadows that sometimes crossed his face. "Thank you for telling me," she said softly. "Never told anyone before," Frank admitted. "Not sure why I'm telling you now, but Olivia thought she knew." In their short time together, something had formed between them, a connection that went beyond rescuer and rescued. Whether it was their shared experience of loss, their common displacement, or simply the chemistry that sometimes exists between two people, she couldn't say. But it was real and growing stronger with each passing day. "We should get some sleep," Frank said finally. "Long ride tomorrow." "Yes," Olivia agreed, though sleep felt impossible now. "Good night, Frank." "Good night, Olivia." The morning dawned clear and cool, perfect for traveling. They packed efficiently, loading provisions and Olivia's few belongings onto the horses. Frank had decided they would both ride Olivia on Thunder, who was the steadier mount, and himself on Sadie. The arrangement would allow them to cover ground more quickly. As they prepared to depart, Olivia looked back at the cabin that had been her sanctuary. "I'll miss this place," she said, surprised by the depth of feeling behind the simple statement. Frank, adjusting Sadie's saddle, glanced up at her. "It'll still be here," he said, then returned to his task. Olivia wondered at his words. Was it an invitation to return, a simple observation? Before she could ask, he was helping her mount Thunder, his hands strong and sure at her waist. They set off, heading northeast, following game trails that Frank assured her would eventually connect with the main road to Helena. The terrain was varied. Sometimes they rode through dense forest, other times across open meadows carpeted with wildflowers. Frank set a steady pace, occasionally pointing out landmarks or sharing stories about the area. By midday, they stopped to rest the horses and eat a simple meal beside a clear-running stream. Olivia stretched her legs, walking a short distance upstream to enjoy the view. The water tumbled over rocks, creating miniature waterfalls and pools where trout darted in the shadows. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Frank said, coming to stand beside her. "Breathtaking," Olivia agreed. "I never imagined the West would be like this." "The stories I heard back east made it sound so harsh and forbidding." "It can be," Frank acknowledged. "Winter's brutal, summer brings drought and wildfires, but there's beauty in its hardness." He looked at her. "Takes a certain kind of person to appreciate it." "What kind is that?" "Someone who sees past the surface, who understands that difficult things can still be worthwhile." Olivia felt his words were about more than just the landscape. "I think I'm learning to be that kind of person," she said softly. They continued their journey, the conversation flowing more easily now. Frank spoke of his years as a marshal, of the changes he'd seen as the territories developed. Olivia shared stories of her childhood, her father's business failures that had left her in reduced circumstances, her decision to become a teacher. As afternoon waned, dark clouds began gathering on the horizon. Frank watched them with concern. "Storm's coming in faster than I expected," he said. "We need to find shelter before it hits." They pushed on, Frank leading them toward what he said was an old line shack used by cowboys during cattle drives. The wind picked up, carrying the smell of rain, and thunder rumbled in the distance. Olivia could feel Thunder tensing beneath her, the horse sensing the approaching storm. "There," Frank pointed ahead to a small structure nestled against a hillside. "We'll wait it out there." They reached the line shack just as the first heavy drops began to fall. Frank quickly unsaddled the horses and led them into a lean-to attached to the main structure, while Olivia carried their provisions inside. The shack was primitive but solid, a single room with a small stove, a rough-hewn table, and a narrow cot. Dust covered everything, but the roof appeared intact and the stone chimney looked serviceable. It was nothing like the shack where Olivia had been imprisoned, yet she couldn't help the momentary flash of panic as she stepped inside. Frank noticed her hesitation. "We don't have to stay," he said quietly. "We could try to outrun the storm." Olivia shook her head. "No, this is fine, just memories." She forced a smile. "Besides, it's much nicer than that other place." While Frank built a fire in the stove, Olivia swept the floor and dusted the sparse furnishings with her handkerchief. Outside, the storm intensified, rain hammering on the roof and wind howling around the eaves. But inside, warmth and light began to fill the small space. "Not exactly the Grand Hotel," Frank commented, surveying their accommodations, "but it'll keep us dry." "It's perfect," Olivia assured him, and meant it. After her ordeal, she had developed a new appreciation for simple comforts: shelter, warmth, safety. They prepared a simple meal from their provisions, then sat at the table playing cards as the storm raged outside. The close quarters made their awareness of each other more acute. Each accidental brush of hands, each shared glance, seemed magnified in the intimate setting. As night fell, the practical matter of sleeping arrangements became unavoidable. There was only the one narrow cot, barely wide enough for a single person. "You take the cot," Frank said, already spreading his blanket on the floor. "I've slept on worse." Olivia wanted to protest, but knew there was no practical alternative. "Thank you," she said simply. She settled onto the cot while Frank banked the fire for the night. The storm continued, though with less intensity now. In the dim light, she watched as Frank lay down on his makeshift bed just a few feet away. "Frank," she said softly. I've been thinking about what you said about your wife and daughter." Olivia hesitated. "Do you think you'll ever, that is, have you considered finding someone else?" Frank finished for her. He was quiet for a long moment. "For a long time I couldn't imagine it." Another pause. "Lately I've been wondering." The simple admission hung in the air between them. Olivia's heart raced, but she didn't trust herself to speak. "What about you?" Frank asked. "You never mentioned anyone back east." "There was someone," Olivia admitted. "A professor at the ladies' college where I studied. He asked me to marry him just before my father died." She sighed. "When he learned I would bring no dowry to the marriage, he withdrew his offer." "Sounds like you had a lucky escape," Frank observed. "I believe I did," Olivia agreed, though at the time it felt like another loss. Thunder crashed directly overhead, making her jump. Frank sat up, concerned. "You all right?" "Yes," Olivia assured him, "just startled." But the storm had unsettled her more than she wanted to admit. Memories of the shack where she'd been held threatened to overwhelm her, the darkness, the fear, the uncertainty. Frank seemed to sense her distress. He moved to sit on the edge of the cot, close but not touching her. "Want me to light the lamp again?" he asked. Olivia shook her head. "No, I'm fine, really, you're shaking." She hadn't realized it until he mentioned it, but her hands were indeed trembling. "It's silly," she whispered. "I know I'm safe now." "Not silly," Frank contradicted. "What you went through, it leaves marks, not all of them visible." Olivia looked up at him, grateful for his understanding. In the dim light from the banked fire, his features were softened, his eyes reflecting concern and something deeper. Without thinking, she reached out and touched his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. Frank went very still. Then, slowly, he covered her hand with his own, turning his face slightly to press a kiss to her palm. The gesture, so tender and unexpected, brought tears to Olivia's eyes. "Frank," she whispered, the single word containing a question, a plea, a promise. He leaned forward, hesitant at first, then with growing certainty as she moved to meet him. Their lips met in a kiss that started gently but quickly deepened, years of loneliness and longing flowing between them. Olivia wound her arms around his neck, drawing him closer while his hands came to rest at her waist. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing heavily. Frank rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed. "I didn't plan this," he said softly. "Nor I," Olivia admitted. "But I'm not sorry." Frank pulled back slightly to look at her. "Neither am I," he said. "But Olivia, you should know I'm not a wealthy man. My life here is simple, sometimes hard." "I didn't come west looking for an easy life," she reminded him. "I came looking for my own place, where I could be valued for more than my family name or social connections." "And have you found it?" Olivia smiled. "I believe I'm getting closer." This time she initiated the kiss, her hands framing his face as she drew him to her. Frank responded eagerly, his arms encircling her, pulling her against his chest. They kissed deeply, passionately, making up for lost time and opportunities. When they separated again, both were flushed and disheveled. Frank's eyes had darkened with desire, but he made no move to take things further. "We should get some rest," he said, his voice husky. "Still have a day's ride ahead of us." Olivia nodded, though rest was the furthest thing from her mind. "Stay," she said, moving over on the narrow cot. "There's room for both of us." Frank hesitated, then carefully lay down beside her. The fit was tight, necessitating that they lie close together, Olivia's back against Frank's chest, his arm draped protectively over her waist. The position was intimate but innocent, both of them still fully clothed. "Is this all right?" he asked, his breath warm against her ear. "Perfect," Olivia assured him, covering his hand with hers where it rested at her waist. As they lay together, listening to the storm gradually subsiding outside, Olivia felt a sense of rightness of coming home. It was too soon, perhaps, to call it love. But it was the beginning of something real and precious, something worth nurturing. "Good night, Frank," she whispered. "Good night, Olivia," he replied, pressing a gentle kiss to her hair. They fell asleep in each other's arms, while outside the storm cleared to reveal a sky full of stars. Morning brought sunshine streaming through the cabin's single window and the singing of birds from nearby trees. Olivia woke slowly, momentarily confused by the unfamiliar surroundings and the warm presence beside her. Then memory returned, and with it a flood of emotions: happiness, uncertainty, hope. Frank was already awake, watching her with a softness in his eyes she hadn't seen before. "Morning," he said quietly. "Good morning," Olivia replied, suddenly shy. In the clear light of day, their actions of the night before seemed both wonderful and slightly frightening in their implications. Frank seemed to sense her uncertainty. He brushed a strand of hair from her face, his touch gentle. "No regrets?" he asked. Olivia shook her head. "None," she assured him. "You, not a single one," he said with a smile that transformed his usually serious face. They rose and prepared for the day's journey, moving around each other with a new awareness, stealing glances and brief touches as they packed their belongings. The storm had passed, leaving the world washed clean, the air crisp and fragrant with pine and wildflowers. As they mounted their horses to continue their journey, Olivia looked back at the lined shack. What had begun as simple shelter from a storm had become something more: a turning point, a beginning. "Ready?" Frank asked, bringing Sadie alongside Thunder. Olivia nodded. "Ready." They rode northeast, following old game trails that Frank said would eventually connect with the main road to Helena. The landscape gradually changed from forested hills to more open country, with rolling grasslands and distant mountains visible on the horizon. Around midday, they stopped to rest the horses near a small stream. As Olivia was filling their canteens, Frank suddenly tensed, his hand moving to the rifle in his saddle scabbard. "What is it?" Olivia asked, alarmed by his change in demeanor. "Riders," Frank said tersely. "Coming fast from the south." Olivia followed his gaze. In the distance, she could make out 3 horsemen approaching at a gallop. Even from this distance, something about them seemed familiar, and a cold fear gripped her heart. "It's them," she whispered. "The men who took me." Frank's expression hardened. "Get to the horses," he instructed. "We need to move." They mounted quickly, Frank leading them toward a copse of trees that offered some cover, but they had been spotted. The riders changed course, cutting directly toward them across the open prairie. "They're gaining on us," Olivia said, glancing over her shoulder. Frank pulled his rifle from its scabbard. "When I tell you, ride for those rocks," he said, nodding toward a rocky outcropping about a quarter-mile ahead. "Don't stop, don't look back, I'll be right behind you." "Frank, no, trust me, Olivia," he said, his eyes meeting hers. "I won't let them take you again." Before she could protest further, he wheeled Sadie around and called out, "Now, go!" Olivia urged Thunder forward, the horse responding instantly to her command. Behind her, she heard Frank shout a warning to the approaching riders, followed by the crack of his rifle. She wanted desperately to look back, but kept her focus ahead, guiding Thunder toward the rocky shelter Frank had indicated. Reaching the outcropping, Olivia dismounted and tethered Thunder to a scrubby tree. She crouched behind a boulder, peering anxiously back the way she had come. Frank was riding hard toward her with 2 riders in pursuit. The third was nowhere to be seen. As Frank neared the rocks, he fired again over his shoulder. One of the pursuers fell from his horse, but the other continued the chase. Olivia held her breath as Frank finally reached the shelter of the rocks, sliding from Sadie's back and taking cover beside her. "Are you all right?" he asked, breathless from the ride. "I'm fine," she assured him. "But there were 3 of them, I know," Frank said grimly. "One of them circled around. He'll be trying to flank us." Even as he spoke, a shot rang out from their left, the bullet striking the rock near Olivia's head. Frank pushed her lower behind the boulder, then returned fire, his expression focused and determined. "That's close enough, Marshal," a voice called from behind another cluster of rocks about 50 yards away. "We just want the woman, let us have her and you can ride away." "Not a Marshal anymore," Frank called back, "and the lady isn't going anywhere with you." Olivia's heart pounded in her chest. These were the men who had terrorized her, who had left her to die in that shack. Their voices brought back the fear, the helplessness she had felt during those dark days. "Frank," she whispered, "there's something I need to tell you." He glanced at her, concern in his eyes. "What is it?" "When they took me, I overheard them talking. They're not just robbers. They're running guns to renegade groups stirring up trouble with the tribes. That's why they kept me alive. At first they thought I might have heard something useful during the robbery." Frank absorbed this information, his expression grim. "That explains a lot," he said. "The army's been trying to figure out where those guns have been coming from." Another shot ricocheted off the rocks above them. Frank returned fire, then turned back to Olivia. "I need to get a better position," he said. "Stay low, and if I tell you to run, you run. Understand?" Olivia nodded, her throat tight with fear, not for herself, but for him. "Be careful," she whispered. Frank gave her a quick, fierce kiss. "Always am," he promised. He moved away, keeping low as he worked his way around the perimeter of their rocky shelter. Olivia watched him go, her heart in her throat. She had only just found him. The thought of losing him now was unbearable. The gunfire continued intermittently, echoing across the open landscape. Olivia tried to keep track of positions by the sound, but the rocky terrain distorted the reports, making it difficult to tell where the shots were coming from. Suddenly, there was a flurry of gunfire, followed by a shout of pain. Olivia's breath caught. Was it Frank? She resisted the urge to call out, knowing it would only give away her position. Silence fell, broken only by the soft whickering of the horses. Olivia strained to hear any movement, any indication of what had happened. Then, footsteps crunched on gravel, approaching her position. She pressed herself against the boulder, her heart hammering. "Olivia?" Frank's voice came low and urgent. "It's clear." She sagged with relief, standing on shaky legs as Frank appeared around the edge of the boulder. He was dusty, and there was a graze on his cheek where a bullet had come too close, but he was alive and whole. "The Turner brothers won't be troubling anyone else," he said grimly. "Army can sort out what to do with the guns now." Olivia moved into his arms without hesitation, holding him tightly as if to reassure herself that he was really there, really safe. Frank returned the embrace just as fiercely, his face buried in her hair. "I thought I might lose you," she whispered against his chest. "Not a chance," Frank replied, his voice rough with emotion. "I just found you." They stood that way for several long moments, the relief of survival washing over them. When they finally separated, Frank cupped her face in his hands, his eyes searching hers. "We need to get to Helena," he said. "Report what happened. Make sure the army knows about the gun running," Olivia nodded. "And I need to see about that teaching position." A shadow crossed Frank's face at the mention of her original plans, but he nodded. "Right, let's get moving then." They mounted their horses and continued their journey, leaving the site of the confrontation behind. The mood between them was subdued now, both processing the events of the morning and the implications for their future. By late afternoon, they reached the main road to Helena. Traffic increased, wagons heading to market, riders carrying mail, families moving west. After days of solitude, the activity was almost jarring. "We'll reach town by nightfall," Frank observed as they paused to rest the horses. "Find a hotel, get a proper meal." Olivia nodded, trying to summon enthusiasm for the prospect. Just days ago, reaching Helena had been her goal, her hope for a new beginning. Now she found herself looking back the way they had come, thinking of a small cabin in the wilderness and the man who had made it a home. As if reading her thoughts, Frank said, "You'll like Helena. It's growing fast, but still has a frontier feel. Good people there." "Will you stay?" Olivia asked, the question that had been on her mind all day. Frank was quiet for a moment. "For a day or two," he said finally. "Need to report to the sheriff about the Turner gang, make sure the army knows about the guns." And then, he looked at her, his expression unreadable. "Depends." "On what?" "On whether I have a reason to stay," Frank said simply. Olivia's heart quickened. "And if your reason was going back to that cabin of yours," a smile tugged at the corners of Frank's mouth, "then I'd be heading back that way." They continued riding, the conversation shifting to lighter topics as they approached the outskirts of Helena. The town sprawled across a valley, larger than Olivia had expected, with substantial buildings of brick and stone mixed among the more typical wooden structures of a frontier settlement. As they rode down the main street, Frank pointed out landmarks: the courthouse, the assay office, the hotel where they would stay. People nodded greetings to him. Despite his self-imposed isolation, he was clearly known and respected here. At the hotel, Frank secured 2 adjoining rooms, insisting on propriety despite their newfound closeness. After days on the trail, the prospect of a real bed, hot water, and clean clothes was undeniably appealing. "I'll see about locating your trunk," Frank said as they parted in the hallway. The stage office should have a record of what happened to it after the robbery. "Thank you," Olivia said, suddenly awkward in this new, more formal setting. "For everything." Frank's expression softened. "Get some rest," he said gently. "We can talk more over dinner." In her room, Olivia found a bath already drawn, steam rising invitingly from the copper tub. She sank into the hot water with a sigh of pleasure, washing away the dust and tension of the day's journey. As she bathed, she tried to sort through her conflicting emotions. The teaching position had been her anchor, her plan for independence in this new land. But the events of the past week had changed her perspective. She had experienced both the harshness and the beauty of the frontier firsthand. And she had met a man who embodied both: Frank, with his strength and his gentleness, his solitude and his capacity for connection. After her bath, Olivia dressed in her traveling suit, now clean and properly mended thanks to the hotel's laundry service. She was brushing her hair when a knock came at the door. "Your trunk's been located," Frank announced when she opened the door. "It's being brought up from the stage office." Olivia's face lit up. "That's wonderful news. I was beginning to think I'd never see my belongings again." Frank smiled at her enthusiasm. "The school superintendent is also aware of your arrival," he added. "He'd like to meet with you tomorrow morning." The mention of the teaching position sobered Olivia. "So the position hasn't been filled?" "Apparently not," Frank confirmed. "Though I didn't get details." Before Olivia could respond, a bellboy arrived with her trunk. Once it was safely deposited in her room and the boy tipped, Olivia opened it eagerly, relieved to find her possessions: intact clothing, books, a few keepsakes from home, and most importantly, her teaching credentials. "I'll let you get settled," Frank said, moving toward the door. "Dinner in an hour," Olivia nodded, suddenly aware of the crossroads before her. By this time tomorrow, she would need to have made a decision that would shape her future in this new land. Dinner was served in the hotel's dining room, a surprisingly elegant space with white tablecloths and silver cutlery. Olivia, dressed now in one of her own gowns, a simple blue silk that brought out the color of her eyes, felt more like herself than she had in days. Frank, too, had transformed. Gone was the rugged frontiersman in worn leather and faded denim. In his place sat a gentleman in a well-cut suit, his hair neatly combed, his face freshly shaved. Only his tanned skin and the slight calluses on his hands hinted at his wilderness life. "You clean up well, Mr. Tanner," Olivia observed with a smile as he held her chair. "As do you, Miss Zimmerman," he returned, his eyes appreciative as they took in her appearance. "Though I must admit, I've grown fond of seeing you in my old clothes." The meal was excellent: roast beef, fresh vegetables, bread still warm from the oven. After days of trail food, it was a welcome luxury. They ate heartily, conversation flowing easily between them as they discussed the town, its history, its people. It wasn't until dessert apple pie with fresh cream that Frank broached the subject they had both been avoiding. "Have you decided?" he asked quietly. "About the teaching position?" Olivia set down her fork. "I haven't met with the superintendent yet," she reminded him, "but if it's offered." Frank pressed, "Will you accept?" "Would you want me to?" she countered, watching his face. Frank was silent for a long moment. "I want you to be happy," he finally said. "To have the life you came west to find." "That's not an answer," Olivia pointed out. "What do you want, Frank?" He met her gaze directly. "I want you to come back with me," he admitted, "to give us a chance to see what this is between us." He gestured between them. "But I won't ask you to give up your dreams." "What if my dreams have changed?" Olivia asked softly. Hope flickered in Frank's eyes. "Have they?" I came west seeking independence, yes, but also connection, purpose. She reached across the table, taking his hand. I've found those things with you, Frank, in a way I never expected. It wouldn't be an easy life, he warned. Winters are harsh. The nearest neighbor is 5 miles away. And he hesitated. I'm not always easy to live with. I don't want easy, Olivia said firmly. I want real. Frank's hand tightened around hers. What about teaching? You've trained for it, prepared for it. There are children in the valley who need education too, aren't there? Olivia asked. Perhaps I could teach there, establish a small school. The idea took root as she spoke it aloud. Not a formal classroom in a growing town, but something more personal, more needed, perhaps a school for the scattered children of homesteaders and ranchers who had no access to education. There are at least a dozen families within riding distance, Frank confirmed, warming to the idea. None of those children are getting proper schooling. Olivia nodded, excitement building. I could use the teaching materials I brought with me, order more as needed. Perhaps even convince the territorial government to provide some funding eventually. You could use the old Wilkins place, Frank suggested. It's about 2 miles from my cabin, been sitting empty since the family moved to Oregon last year. Solid building, big enough for a classroom. They continued discussing the possibilities, their meal forgotten as they built a shared vision of the future. By the time they finally left the dining room, Olivia's decision was made. In the hallway outside their rooms, they paused, reluctant to part, despite the propriety they had agreed upon. I should meet with the superintendent tomorrow anyway, Olivia said, to explain my decision and see if he knows of any resources that might help with the Valley School. Frank nodded. I need to speak with the sheriff and the army representative about the Turner gang. We could meet for lunch afterward. I'd like that, Olivia agreed. They stood close, the air between them charged with unspoken feelings. Finally, Frank leaned down and kissed her gently at first, then with growing passion as she responded. His arms encircled her waist, drawing her against him, while her hands slid up to his shoulders, steadying herself as the world seemed to tilt around her. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless. Frank rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed as if memorizing the moment. Good night, Olivia, he whispered. Good night, Frank, she replied, reluctantly stepping back. They parted, each entering their own room. But as Olivia prepared for bed, she felt more certainty than she had in years. Tomorrow would bring a new beginning, not the one she had planned, but one infinitely more promising. Morning brought sunshine streaming through the hotel window and the sounds of a town already bustling with activity. Olivia dressed carefully for her meeting with the superintendent, choosing a conservative navy blue dress that spoke of competence and professionalism. She and Frank breakfasted together in the hotel dining room, discussing their plans for the day. He would speak with the sheriff first, then meet with the army representative about the gun-running operation. Olivia would meet with Superintendent Barnes at the schoolhouse, then visit the mercantile to inquire about ordering teaching supplies. Good luck today, Frank said as they parted outside the hotel. Whatever you decide, I'll support it. Olivia smiled up at him. My decision is made, she assured him, but thank you. The schoolhouse was a substantial brick building on the east side of town with large windows and a bell tower. Inside, Olivia found a well-appointed classroom with rows of desks, maps on the walls, and a small library of textbooks. It was everything she had hoped for when she accepted the position from Philadelphia. Superintendent Barnes, a portly man with mutton chop whiskers, welcomed her warmly. Miss Zimmerman, we'd begun to fear the worst when you didn't arrive on schedule. Olivia explained the robbery and her subsequent ordeal, careful to present the facts without unnecessary drama. The superintendent was appropriately horrified and sympathetic. My dear lady, how fortunate that Mr. Tanner found you. He's a fine man, served the territory well during his time as a marshal. Yes, he has been invaluable, Olivia agreed, feeling a blush rise to her cheeks. They discussed the teaching position, which was indeed still available. The previous teacher had departed suddenly to care for an ailing parent, leaving the school without instruction for the past month. Superintendent Barnes was eager to have Olivia start immediately. However, Olivia said carefully, I've been considering an alternative arrangement. She outlined her idea for the Valley School, explaining the needs she and Frank had identified. To her surprise, Barnes was enthusiastic rather than disappointed. A rural school. Excellent initiative, Miss Zimmerman. The Territorial Education Office has been concerned about those outlying areas for some time, but finding qualified teachers willing to work in such isolated conditions has been challenging. He went on to offer support some surplus textbooks and supplies, a small stipend from the Education Fund, and most valuably, official recognition of the school, which would give her students learning legitimate standing. By the time Olivia left the schoolhouse, her step was light with excitement. What had begun as an alternative to her original plan now felt like a true calling, bringing education to children who might otherwise go without. At the mercantile, she placed orders for additional supplies: slates, chalk, paper, pencils, more advanced books for older students. The proprietor, learning of her plans, offered to deliver everything to Frank's cabin the following week, saving them the trouble of transporting the materials themselves. Any friend of Frank Tanner is a friend of mine, he declared. Man saved my life during a blizzard 3 winters back. Tracked me for 2 days after I got separated from my hunting party. Olivia was learning that Frank had touched many lives during his years in the territory, despite his preference for solitude. It made her admire him all the more, knowing that his reclusiveness was a choice rather than a rejection of community. As arranged, she met Frank for lunch at a small cafe near the courthouse. His face brightened when he saw her approach, and he rose to pull out her chair. "How did your meetings go?" she asked once they were settled. "Productive," Frank replied. "The sheriff was glad to have confirmation about the Turner gang. Apparently they've been suspected in several robberies across the territory. And the Army representative was especially interested in the gun-running information." "Will there be an investigation?" Frank nodded. "Already underway. They're sending troops to the location I described." He paused. "What about your meeting? How did the superintendent take your decision?" Olivia's face lit up as she shared the unexpected support she had received. "He's offered official recognition for the Valley School and supplies and even a small stipend." "That's wonderful," Frank said, genuine pleasure in his voice. "You'll be able to give those children a real education." "Our nearest neighbor has children, doesn't he?" Olivia asked, recalling a conversation from their journey. "The one who checks on your place when you're away, the Hansons," Frank confirmed. 3 boys aged 6 to 12, good kids but wild as March hares, never had much schooling. "They'll be my first students then," Olivia decided. "Along with any others we can identify once we return to the valley." They continued discussing plans over their meal, practical matters of repairing the Wilkins place, organizing the classroom, reaching out to families in the area. With each detail they resolved, their shared future took clearer shape. After lunch, they separated again to complete their errands. Frank needed to purchase supplies for the return journey and check on some business at the bank. Olivia wanted to visit the dressmaker to order some more practical clothing for her new life. "Meet back at the hotel for dinner," Frank suggested as they parted. Olivia agreed, already looking forward to the evening. The day had confirmed what her heart already knew, that her decision was right, that this unexpected path was where she belonged. At the dressmaker's shop, Olivia selected patterns and fabrics for dresses better suited to frontier life, sturdy cottons and wools in practical colors, with simpler lines than her city clothes. She also commissioned riding skirts and a winter coat, preparing for the practical realities of life in the valley. As she was leaving the shop, she quite literally bumped into a well-dressed woman entering. "Oh, I do apologize," Olivia exclaimed. "No harm done," the woman assured her with a friendly smile. She was perhaps a few years older than Olivia, with glossy dark hair and fashionable attire that spoke of Eastern origins. "You're new to Helena, aren't you?" the woman asked. "I'm Margaret Holloway. My husband is the bank manager." "Olivia Zimmerman," Olivia introduced herself. "I arrived just yesterday." Recognition dawned in Margaret's eyes. The school teacher, we've been so looking forward to your arrival. Will you be starting classes soon? Olivia explained her change of plans, somewhat apprehensive about this first encounter with Helena society. To her relief, Margaret seemed genuinely interested rather than judgmental. What a wonderful initiative, she enthused. Those families have been without educational opportunities for too long, and Frank Tanner is involved, you say? A knowing look crossed her face. He's a fine man, keeps to himself these days, but there's not a person in this territory who wouldn't vouch for his character. They chatted for a few more minutes, with Margaret extending an invitation to dinner before Olivia's departure from town. By the time they parted, Olivia had gained not only a potential friend, but also a valuable connection to Helena's resources. The afternoon passed quickly as Olivia completed her preparations. She wrote letters to Philadelphia, informing her few remaining connections there of her new circumstances. She visited the bookshop, selecting volumes for both teaching and personal enjoyment. And she spent a quiet hour in the small church at the end of the main street, offering thanks for the unexpected turn her life had taken. When she returned to the hotel, she found a note had been slipped under her door. In Frank's strong, clear handwriting, it read, "Olivia, meet me on the hotel terrace at sunset." Frank, intrigued, Olivia changed into one of her nicer dresses, a sage green silk that complemented her auburn hair and fair complexion. She arranged her hair simply but elegantly, wanting to look her best without knowing exactly why. The hotel terrace overlooked a small garden with a view of the mountains beyond the town. As Olivia stepped outside, the setting sun bathed everything in golden light. Frank stood at the railing, his back to her, looking out at the vista. He had changed as well, wearing a dark suit similar to the one from the previous evening. "Frank," she called softly. He turned, and the expression on his face as he saw her made her heart skip. He crossed to her in a few long strides, taking her hands in his. "You look beautiful," he said simply. "Thank you," Olivia replied, suddenly shy under his intense gaze. "Your note was mysterious." Frank led her to the railing, where a small table had been set with wine and glasses. "I wanted us to have a moment alone, away from the dining room," he explained, pouring 2 glasses, "to celebrate your decision and to ask you something." Olivia accepted the wine, curiosity and anticipation building. "What did you want to ask?" Frank took a deep breath, seeming uncharacteristically nervous. "I know this is fast," he began. "We've known each other barely a week, but I've lived long enough to recognize when something is real, when it matters." He set down his glass and took both her hands in his. "Olivia Zimmerman, I'm not a man of many words or grand gestures, but I know that meeting you has changed everything for me. The cabin isn't just a place to sleep anymore, it's a home waiting for you to fill it with life. The valley isn't just land, it's a future we could build together." Olivia's breath caught as she realized where this was leading. Frank continued, his voice growing more confident. "I'm asking if you'll marry me. Not right away, we can wait, get to know each other better if that's what you want, but I want you to know that's where my heart is. That when I think about going back to that cabin, I'm thinking about going back with you as my wife." Tears filled Olivia's eyes, but they were tears of joy. "Frank," she whispered, "when you found me in that shack, you said you're free, and in that moment I was free from darkness, from fear. But in the days since, I've realized that true freedom isn't just the absence of confinement. It's the presence of choice, of purpose, of love." She stepped closer to him. "Yes, I'll marry you. I don't need more time to know that what I feel for you is real." Frank's face transformed with happiness. He pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a passion that left no doubt of his feelings. Olivia responded in kind, her heart overflowing with love for this man who had saved her in more ways than one. When they finally broke apart, Frank reached into his pocket and withdrew a small box. "I visited the jeweler this afternoon," he explained, opening it to reveal a simple but elegant ring, a small sapphire flanked by tiny diamonds in a gold setting. "It reminded me of your eyes." Olivia's breath caught as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if meant to be there all along. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "There's one more thing," Frank said, his eyes twinkling with a hint of mischief. "I spoke with the minister this afternoon." He's available to perform the ceremony tomorrow if you're willing. We could be married before we leave Helena." "Tomorrow," Olivia repeated, surprised by the suggestion. "Unless you'd prefer to wait," Frank added quickly. "I don't want to rush you." Olivia considered the proposal. A quick wedding in Helena before returning to the valley as husband and wife. It wasn't the elaborate ceremony she might once have envisioned, but it felt right, a clean beginning to their new life together. Yes, she decided, smiling up at him. Tomorrow would be perfect. They sealed the agreement with another kiss, this one gentle and full of promise. As the last rays of sunlight painted the mountains in shades of pink and gold, Olivia and Frank stood together on the terrace, looking out toward the future they would build together. The morning of their wedding dawned clear and bright, as if nature itself approved of their union. Olivia woke early, a mixture of excitement and nervousness fluttering in her stomach. Today she would become Mrs. Franklin Tanner, a transformation as significant as her journey from east to west had been. A knock at her door revealed a beaming hotel maid carrying a large box. "Delivery for you, Miss Zimmerman," she announced, "from Madame Lawrence's shop." Inside the box, nestled in tissue paper, lay a wedding dress of simple but elegant design, ivory silk with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. A note in Frank's handwriting read, "For my bride." The dressmaker worked through the night to have it ready. Tears pricked Olivia's eyes at this thoughtful gesture. She had planned to wear her best blue dress, not expecting a proper wedding gown would be possible on such short notice. Another knock heralded the arrival of Margaret Holloway, whom Olivia had impulsively invited to attend the ceremony when they met the previous day. "I've brought reinforcements," Margaret declared, ushering in a young woman carrying a basket of flowers and hairpins. "This is my sister, Alice. She's a wizard with hair arrangements." With their help, Olivia was transformed. The dress fit perfectly, skimming her slender figure and highlighting her natural grace. Alice arranged Olivia's auburn hair in an elegant updo, weaving small white flowers through the coiled braids. Margaret contributed a borrowed pearl necklace for something borrowed, she explained with a wink. As noon approached, Olivia felt a strange calm replace her earlier nervousness. This wasn't the wedding she had imagined as a young girl, but it was exactly right for the woman she had become: simple, meaningful, true. The ceremony was held in the small church at the end of Main Street. Frank waited at the altar, looking handsome and slightly nervous in a new suit, his hair neatly combed, his eyes never leaving Olivia as she walked down the aisle. Beside him stood Jacob Hansen, his nearest neighbor and friend, who had ridden into town that morning upon receiving Frank's telegram. The congregation was small but surprisingly substantial: Margaret and her husband, several merchants with whom Frank had dealings, the sheriff and his wife, Superintendent Barnes, and a few curious townspeople who had heard about the impromptu wedding. "Dearly beloved," the minister began, his voice warm and resonant in the simple church. The ceremony itself was brief but deeply moving. Olivia and Frank exchanged traditional vows, their voices clear and sure as they promised to love, honor, and cherish each other for the rest of their days. When Frank slipped the gold band onto her finger to join the engagement ring, his hands were steady, his eyes filled with a love that took Olivia's breath away. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister declared. "What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." Frank's kiss was gentle but fervent, a promise of the life they would build together. As they turned to face their small audience, Olivia felt a surge of happiness unlike anything she had experienced before. This man, this place, this life, all of it felt right in a way she couldn't have imagined when she first set out from Philadelphia. A simple reception followed at the hotel, with cake and champagne provided by the Holloways as a wedding gift. Townsfolk who hadn't attended the ceremony stopped by to offer congratulations, many expressing surprise that the reclusive Frank Tanner had not only taken a wife, but one as refined and educated as Olivia. "You'll be good for him," Jacob Hansen told Olivia privately during the celebration. "Man's been alone too long, and those kids of mine need schooling something fierce," he grinned. "My wife's about ready to send them all to military school. As the afternoon waned, Olivia and Frank slipped away to prepare for their departure the following morning. Their wedding night would be spent at the hotel, another gift, this one from the proprietor who, like so many others, had a story about how Frank had once helped him. In their suite, which had been decorated with flowers and a bottle of fine wine, Frank took Olivia in his arms. No regrets. He asked softly, echoing the question from days before. None, Olivia assured him, reaching up to touch his face. This feels more right than anything I've ever done. When I found you in that shack, Frank said, his voice low with emotion, I had no idea I was finding my own freedom too. You've brought light back into my life, Olivia. Their kiss deepened, passion building between them as they moved toward the bedroom. This time there was no need to stop, no reason to hold back. They were husband and wife, beginning the intimate dance that would bind them even closer. Frank was gentle and patient, mindful of Olivia's inexperience. His hands and lips explored her body with reverence, drawing responses she hadn't known herself capable of. When they finally joined as one, Olivia felt a completion, a rightness that transcended the physical act. This was what love was meant to be, tender yet powerful, giving yet receiving, a true partnership of body and soul. Afterward, they lay entwined, talking softly about their future, the valley school, expanding the cabin, the life they would build together. Outside, the sun set on Helena, casting long shadows across the growing town. But inside their room, a new day was dawning, the first of many they would share. The journey back to the valley took 2 days, though it seemed shorter than their trip to Helena had been. They traveled easily, no longer pursued, no longer uncertain of their path. Frank pointed out landmarks with renewed enthusiasm, describing the changing seasons in the valley, the wildlife they might encounter, the hidden beauty of the place that would now be Olivia's home as well. When they finally crested the last rise and the cabin came into view, Olivia felt a surge of emotion. This small structure of logs and stone, set against the backdrop of forest and mountains, represented everything she had found in this new land: independence, purpose, love. Frank drew their horses to a halt, looking down at the homestead. "Welcome home, Mrs. Tanner," he said, his voice warm with pride and affection. Olivia smiled at her new name, still unfamiliar but deeply right. "It's beautiful," she said simply. They rode down to the cabin, where Jacob Hansen had indeed kept things in order during their absence. The chickens clucked in their coop, the vegetable garden had been weeded, and fresh firewood was stacked neatly by the door. Inside, someone, presumably Mrs. Hansen, had placed wildflowers in a jar on the table and left a loaf of fresh bread wrapped in a cloth. Frank built a fire while Olivia unpacked their provisions. They moved around each other with an easy familiarity, as if they had been sharing this space for years rather than days. When darkness fell, they ate a simple meal by lamplight, discussing their plans for the following days. "I'll take you to see the Wilkins place tomorrow," Frank said. "It needs some work, but the structure is sound. Could be ready for classes within a few weeks." Olivia nodded, excitement building at the prospect of creating her school. "And we should visit the families in the area, let them know about the school, the Hansens first, of course." "Sarah Hansen will be delighted," Frank assured her. "She's been trying to teach those boys herself, but with the baby and the farm." He shook his head. "Too much for one woman." "Not anymore," Olivia said firmly. "Now she has help." Later, as they prepared for bed their first night in the cabin as husband and wife, Olivia found herself standing at the window, looking out at the star-filled sky. So much had changed in such a short time. Just 2 weeks ago, she had been on a stagecoach heading west, full of plans and expectations. Now here she was, married to a man she barely knew yet somehow understood completely, about to begin a life she had never imagined. Frank came to stand behind her, his arms encircling her waist, his chin resting on her shoulder. "Having second thoughts?" he asked quietly. Olivia leaned back against him, drawing strength and comfort from his solid presence. "Not second thoughts," she clarified, "just marveling at how life can change so completely, so quickly." "For the better, I hope," Frank murmured, pressing a kiss to her neck. Olivia turned in his arms, facing him in the soft lamplight. For the better, she confirmed. Definitely for the better. Their kiss was tender at first, then increasingly urgent as desire kindled between them. Frank lifted her in his arms and carried her to the bed, their bed now laying her down with gentle reverence before joining her there. Their lovemaking was both familiar and new, a continuation of what they had begun in Helena, but deepened by the knowledge that they were truly home, truly together. Afterward, as they lay entwined beneath the quilt, Olivia listened to the night sounds of their mountain home, the distant howl of a wolf, the soft hooting of an owl, the whisper of wind through pine needles. So different from the city noises she had known all her life, yet already becoming familiar, becoming part of her. "Frank," she whispered, not sure if he was still awake. Came his drowsy response. "Thank you for finding me." His arms tightened around her. "Thank you for being worth finding," he murmured. Olivia smiled in the darkness, contentment washing over her. She had come west seeking freedom and had found it not in independence alone, but in the arms of a man who had broken open not just a physical prison, but the constraints she hadn't even realized were binding her heart. As she drifted toward sleep, Olivia Tanner knew with absolute certainty that her journey had only just begun. There would be challenges ahead, harsh winters, the isolation of frontier life, the work of building a school from nothing. But there would also be joy, purpose, and love, so much love. In the small cabin nestled against the Montana wilderness, two people who had found each other against all odds slept peacefully, their dreams intertwined, their futures bound together by choice rather than chance. And outside, under the vast canopy of stars, the world continued its ancient rhythms, indifferent to human concerns, yet somehow blessing this new beginning with its wild, enduring beauty. 5 years later, Olivia stood on the porch of their expanded cabin, watching as Frank taught their 3-year-old son, Samuel, to ride his first pony. The little boy's delighted laughter carried across the yard, mingling with the sounds of chickens clucking and the distant ring of the school bell as the afternoon session ended. The valley had changed in those 5 years. More homesteads established, a small trading post built at the crossroads, even a part-time doctor who visited monthly. But the biggest change was the thriving school that now occupied the renovated Wilkins place, where Olivia taught 15 students ranging in age from 6 to 16. Frank had expanded their cabin, adding 2 bedrooms and a proper kitchen. He had also built a workshop where he crafted furniture during the winter months, pieces now sought after by people as far away as Helena for their beauty and craftsmanship. Their life together had settled into a rhythm challenging at times, especially during the harsh Montana winters, but deeply satisfying. They had weathered difficult moments, a wildfire that had threatened the valley, a fever that had swept through the community, taking 2 of the oldest residents, Olivia's difficult pregnancy with Samuel. But they had faced each challenge together, their bond growing stronger with each trial overcome. As Frank lifted Samuel from the pony and set him on his shoulders, Olivia felt the now familiar flutter of their second child moving within her. Another boy, she suspected, though Frank insisted it would be a girl with her mother's auburn hair and determined spirit. "Mama, did you see?" Samuel called, waving excitedly from his perch on Frank's shoulders. "I rode all by myself, I saw," Olivia called back, smiling at her son's enthusiasm. "You're a natural horseman, just like your father." Frank approached the porch, his face creased in the smile that was no longer rare but still made Olivia's heart skip. At 38, he was even more handsome than when they'd met. A few silver strands now mingled with the brown at his temples, and the lines around his eyes had deepened, but his gaze still held the same strength and tenderness that had first drawn her to him. "School let out early?" he asked, setting Samuel down to run after a butterfly. Olivia nodded. "Mrs. Hanson invited the children to help harvest apples this afternoon, a practical lesson in arithmetic and natural science, I told them." Frank chuckled. "And nothing to do with the apple pies Sarah's likely to send home with them?" "That's merely a fortunate side benefit," Olivia replied primly, though her eyes twinkled with mischief. Frank climbed the steps to join her on the porch, one hand automatically reaching out to rest on her growing belly. "How are you feeling today?" he asked, his voice softening with concern. "Much better than yesterday," Olivia assured him. "This one seems determined to make a more dramatic entrance than Samuel did." Frank's expression grew serious. "I've asked Jacob to stay close to the property these next few weeks, just in case we need to fetch the doctor quickly." Olivia covered his hand with her own. "We'll be fine," she promised, "all of us." Their eyes met in perfect understanding, the shared knowledge of how precious their family was, how fiercely they would protect it. In the 5 years since Frank had broken open that shack and said those life-changing words, "You're free," they had built something neither had dared hope for. A life of purpose, of community, of deep and abiding love. Samuel ran back to them, clutching a handful of wildflowers. "For you, Mama," he said proudly, presenting his slightly crushed bouquet. Olivia accepted the gift with appropriate solemnity. "Thank you, my love, they're beautiful." "Like you," Frank murmured for her ears alone, his arms slipping around her waist. As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, painting the valley in hues of gold and amber, the Tanner family stood together on their porch, two souls who had found each other against all odds, and the new life they had created from that unlikely beginning. In the distance, the school bell hung silent until morning, a symbol of Olivia's contribution to this wild, beautiful place that had become her true home. "No regrets?" Frank asked softly, echoing the question that had become a touchstone of their relationship. Olivia looked up at her husband, then down at their son, then out at the life they had built together. "Not a single one," she replied with absolute certainty. "Not a single one."